It was a sunny afternoon in the bustling city of Lagos, where the rhythm of life moved fast, and fortunes were made and lost in the blink of an eye. But today, something darker was about to unfold. Before we dive into today's heart-wrenching story, welcome to the channel. Thank you so much for your incredible support. Your likes, comments, and shares mean the world to us. Please do a little favor by subscribing to this channel. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Are you tuning in from Lagos, New York, London, or somewhere else? We love connecting with our global family. Now, let me take you back to the story. Flourence sat on the balcony of her father's sprawling mansion, her heart heavy with the weight of the secrets her husband Eric had been keeping from her. She had known Eric for 5 years, married him just 2 years ago, and together they had shared dreams of a happy, prosperous life. But recently, Flourence had begun to notice small changes in his behavior. His usual kindness had turned into cold indifference, and his once loving words had started to feel hollow. Something was wrong. She didn't know what, but the creeping suspicion gnawed at her every time she looked at him. Eric, her handsome and charming husband, had always been a man of ambition. But ambition had a dark side, and it seemed like Eric was willing to cross any line to achieve his goals. Florence's thoughts were interrupted when she received a call from her father's lawyer. Her father, a wealthy businessman with vast land holdings and an extensive collection of valuable assets, had passed away suddenly. Flourence had been his only child, and now the inheritance was hers to manage. The lawyer was finalizing the will, and he wanted to meet with her the next morning to go over the details. But what Flourence didn't know was that her husband, Eric, had been planning something sinister for months. He had learned about her father's immense fortune and had devised a devious plot to seize it for himself. The idea had come to him one late night, over a glass of whiskey. What better way to inherit a fortune than to get rid of the only obstacle standing in his way? Flourence? It was the perfect plan, he thought. Florence's father, a respected and powerful man in the city, had left no direct instructions for how the wealth should be passed down, other than a vague mention that it would go to his daughter. Florence's naivety was his greatest ally. She trusted Eric, and that trust would be his ticket to the wealth he so desperately craved. Eric had already set the plan into motion. The accident would be staged, a helicopter crash while Flourence was out of town for a business trip. It would be believable, tragic even. Flourence would grieve her husband's death, and after the mourning period, the inheritance would pass into his hands. It was flawless. But little did he know, his own actions were about to unravel in ways he couldn't foresee. The day after receiving the lawyer's call, Florence's heart dropped as she overheard a conversation she was never meant to hear. Eric was on the phone with someone, his voice low and urgent. She couldn't hear all the words, but the name, helicopter, caught her attention. As she slowly approached, she heard him say, "It'll be easy. We just need her out of the way for a while." Flourence froze. Her blood ran cold. She didn't need to hear more to understand the truth. Eric wasn't the man she thought he was. The weight of the betrayal settled deep in her chest. The man she loved, her own husband, was plotting to kill her for money. Without a word, she backed away, retreating to her room to gather her thoughts. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. Her mind raced. How could Eric do this to her? To her father's legacy? But it wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the realization that she wasn't the only one in danger. Eric's plan wasn't just about money. He had already made arrangements. The helicopter, the fake crash, the so-called accident, it was all set. And Flourence was the victim in this deadly game. Her head swam as she realized the full extent of Eric's treachery. But she wasn't going to sit back and let this happen. She wouldn't be a passive participant in her own demise. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the mansion's sprawling gardens, Florence's resolve solidified. She would fight back. But how? How could she stop the man she loved from carrying out such a twisted plan? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock on the door. It was Eric. Flourence quickly wiped her tears, forcing a smile as she opened the door. Eric stood there, looking like the charming man she had once fallen in love with, his warm eyes locked on hers. "Hey, love," he said, a little too casually. "How's everything going? You seemed a bit off earlier." Florence's heart raced as she faced him. She had to keep her composure. She couldn't let him see that she knew everything. "I'm fine," she said, her voice steady but distant. "Just a lot on my mind with my father's estate." Eric stepped inside, his usual charming smile plastered on his face. "I know. It must be a lot to handle. But don't worry, I'm here for you. We'll figure this out together." Florence's heart sank as she looked into his eyes. He was a master of deception. But this time, she wouldn't fall for it. She wouldn't let him destroy everything her father had built. The tension in the room was palpable. Flourence was about to say something when she was interrupted by a sudden phone call. It was the lawyer. She quickly answered, trying to mask the storm of emotions brewing inside her. "Flourence," the lawyer said on the other end, "I need to meet with you tomorrow morning. There are some critical details about your father's will that I need to discuss with you. It's urgent." Florence's mind raced. The meeting tomorrow could be the turning point, the moment she either exposed Eric's plot or fell into his trap. But before she could respond, Eric spoke, his voice tinged with a strange, almost menacing calmness. "Don't worry, love," he said, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "We'll handle everything. Together." Florence's heart pounded. What was he planning? And what did the lawyer know? The clock was ticking, and she had only hours to figure out how to stop her husband's deadly scheme. And then, just as she was about to turn away from Eric and leave the room, she heard it. A soft click. The unmistakable sound of a helicopter hovering outside the mansion. Her stomach dropped. The plan was already in motion. And then, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Eric was watching the helicopter with a look of twisted satisfaction in his eyes. Florence's heart raced as she stood frozen in the doorway, her pulse pounding in her ears. She tried to focus on the sounds coming from outside, but her mind was clouded with disbelief. Was Eric truly so ruthless? Was he going to kill her for money? She turned around quickly, her breath catching in her throat. Eric stood there, his face perfectly composed, as though nothing was out of the ordinary. But she knew better now. She had overheard enough to know what was happening. Her eyes met his, searching for any sign of guilt, but there was none. He smiled at her, his charm on full display. "Don't worry, Flourence," he said, his voice dripping with sweetness. "Everything is going to be fine. Just trust me." Trust him. The words echoed in her mind, mocking her. As she walked back to the room, she felt a wave of cold dread wash over her. The helicopter outside, the one that had been hovering just moments ago, wasn't a coincidence. It was part of Eric's plan. The accident, the crash, it was all happening now. Florence's thoughts spun as she searched for a way out. She couldn't just sit back and let this happen. She couldn't let Eric get away with it. But she also couldn't ignore the fact that her life was in grave danger. Eric had been planning this for months, and everything was now coming to a head. Her phone buzzed, and she quickly grabbed it. It was the lawyer again. "Flourence, are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "I've been trying to reach you. There's something about your father's will that you need to know. Something that can change everything." Florence's mind raced. What was the lawyer talking about? Could this be the breakthrough she needed to expose Eric? She couldn't ignore it. She needed to find out what was going on, but she couldn't trust Eric. Not anymore. "I'll meet you in an hour," she replied, trying to sound calm despite the turmoil inside her. She hung up the phone and stood there for a moment, breathing deeply. Her father's wealth, her inheritance, had always seemed like a distant future. Something that would come one day, but not today. But now, it felt like a curse. It was the very thing that had driven Eric to this point. She had to get to the lawyer. But the helicopter was still outside, its ominous presence filling the air with tension. If she left the house, Eric would know she was onto him. But if she stayed, she would be walking into his trap. Florence's hand clenched into a fist. There was no time to waste. She had to act now. "I need to leave," she muttered under her breath. But just as she turned toward the door, it swung open, and Eric walked in. His expression was cold, his eyes calculating. "You're going somewhere?" he asked casually, as though they were still the loving couple they once were. Flourence didn't flinch, her heart beating in her chest. She had to stay calm to stay in control. I need to meet the lawyer. It's about my father's estate. It can't wait. Eric's smile never wavered, but she could see the subtle tension in his jaw. He didn't want her to go. He didn't want anyone to stop him from carrying out his plan. No, Flourence, he said, his voice low and steady. You don't need to go anywhere. You're safe here with me. The word sent a shiver down her spine. Safe. With him. How could he say that so confidently, knowing what he was planning? She took a deep breath. I have to go, Eric. This is important. It's about my father. Eric stepped closer to her, his eyes never leaving hers. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in around her. She could feel the heat radiating off of him, but it wasn't warmth, it was the heat of his anger. I said you're not going anywhere, Eric said, his voice hardening. Florence's heart raced. She had no idea what he might do next, but she couldn't let him stop her. She couldn't let him win. I'm going, Eric, she said firmly, walking past him. She could feel his presence behind her, but she refused to turn around. But as she reached for the door, something strange happened. The helicopter outside suddenly revved its engine. The noise was deafening, and it shook the house. Florence's body froze. The next moment, she heard the unmistakable sound of the helicopter's blades cutting through the air. The ground trembled beneath her feet as a loud explosion rang out, followed by a deafening crash. Florence's heart stopped. The sound of the crash was so close, so real, it felt as though the walls were shaking. She rushed to the window, her breath coming in shallow gasps. From her vantage point, she could see smoke rising from the distance. It was impossible to tell exactly what had happened, but the wreckage was unmistakable. The helicopter had crashed. Florence's stomach churned. Was it all part of Eric's plan? Was he behind this? Or had something gone horribly wrong? She felt a chill run through her body as she turned back to Eric. He stood there, his face as calm as ever, his hands folded casually in front of him. Eric, Flourence whispered, her voice shaking. What have you done? His lips curled into a smile. It's already done, Flourence. The plan is in motion. Her knees buckled, and she stumbled backward. The man she had married, the man she had trusted with everything, had just orchestrated her death. But why? For money? Power? Before she could react, Eric's phone buzzed in his pocket. He reached for it, and his expression shifted ever so slightly as he read the message. Florence's eyes narrowed. What is it? Eric didn't answer immediately. He looked at her with a strange, almost regretful look in his eyes. And then he spoke softly, his voice laced with dark satisfaction. The police are on their way, he said. And so are the authorities. This will be the last mistake you ever make. Florence's heart pounded in her chest. It wasn't over yet. But would she survive this? And what would happen when the police arrived? The suspense hung in the air like a thick fog. Would Eric be exposed, or was he too powerful to be stopped? Florence's legs felt like jelly as she sank onto the couch, her thoughts spiraling out of control. The sound of the crash outside was still fresh in her ears, and the reality of what had just happened, what Eric had orchestrated, seemed almost surreal. Her mind raced as she tried to piece together the details. How could he have done this to me? Eric's calm demeanor was maddening. He stood there, seemingly unfazed by the unfolding chaos. The same man who had once promised to cherish and protect her was now her tormentor, her betrayer. The weight of the betrayal crushed her chest, but she couldn't afford to break down. Not now. Not when the stakes were this high. The phone in her hand vibrated again, but this time it wasn't the lawyer. It was a number she didn't recognize, but something in her gut told her it was important. She answered it without thinking. Flourence. The voice on the other end was urgent, almost frantic. This is Detective Olamide from the Lagos police force. We need to talk to you immediately. Her heart skipped a beat. The police were already involved. The crash, Eric's plan, it was all falling apart, and she hadn't even had time to fully process what was happening. Detective Florence's voice faltered. She had no idea how to explain what she'd overheard, what she suspected. She couldn't trust Eric, but how could she trust the police either? How could she know who was still on Eric's side? "I need you to come down to the station, Miss Flourence," Detective Olamide continued. "There's been a development. We believe the helicopter crash may not have been an accident. Your husband, he's a person of interest." Florence's stomach dropped. She could barely breathe as the realization hit her. The police knew. They had to know that Eric was behind the crash. This was her chance. But even as she thought this, the dark, ominous thought crossed her mind. What if Eric was one step ahead of everyone? What if this was all part of his plan too? She couldn't afford to waste time. She grabbed her purse, her hand shaking, and turned to face Eric, who was still standing there, watching her with that infuriating calm. "Eric!" Her voice was barely a whisper, but the weight of her words was enough. "You've been caught. It's over." Eric looked at her with an expression that was almost too smug. He leaned back against the wall, his arms crossed, his eyes narrowed. "Caught? Flourence, you don't know what you're talking about. The crash was just an accident. The police will find nothing. I'm untouchable." Her anger flared, but she forced herself to stay composed. "Not yet," she reminded herself. "Stay in control." "I'm leaving," she said, her voice steady but filled with determination. "I'm going to the police. You won't get away with this." For a moment, Eric didn't respond. The silence between them stretched, thick and suffocating, until he finally spoke, his voice cold as ice. "You really think the police will believe you? You've got no proof, Flourence. And even if you do, I'll be out on bail before you can say, 'Guilty.' You're nothing without me." The words stung more than she expected, but she refused to let him see her flinch. She grabbed her jacket and stormed out of the room, her mind set on getting to the police. The moment she stepped outside, she was hit with the reality of the situation. The crash site, the helicopter still smoldering in the distance, it was all happening right before her eyes. But what if she was walking straight into Eric's trap? What if he had already manipulated the police? She had to be careful, think fast. The taxi ride to the station felt like a blur. Flourence barely registered the passing streets, her thoughts consumed with fear and uncertainty. Would the police believe her? Or would they side with Eric, the man who had always been so charming, so convincing? She arrived at the station in a daze, her hands trembling as she pushed open the doors. Detective Olamide was waiting for her, standing near a small office. His face was serious, his eyes scanning her as she approached. "Miss Flourence," he greeted her, his voice low. "I'm glad you came. Please come inside. We need to talk." Flourence nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She stepped into the office, her gaze flickering over the piles of paperwork and case files stacked around the room. Everything seemed so ordinary, yet her world felt like it was collapsing around her. Once seated, the detective wasted no time. "We've had our eye on your husband for a while now, Flourence," he said, his voice steady. "There are some discrepancies in his financial records, and our investigation into the helicopter crash has uncovered some troubling evidence. The helicopter was insured under his name." Florence's heart skipped a beat. Eric's name? Why would Eric insure the helicopter? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Detective Olamide leaned forward, his expression intense. "That's what we're trying to figure out. But the timing is suspicious, Ms. Flourence. Your father's estate, the inheritance, you're the key to it all. This isn't just about a helicopter crash. This is about something much bigger." Florence's mind spun. Her father's estate. She had never imagined it would come to this. But then, the detective dropped the bombshell. "We believe Eric was trying to stage your death, Flourence," he said, his voice hardening. "He planned everything, from the crash to your so-called accident, to gain access to your inheritance. But he wasn't counting on you being so sharp." Florence's blood ran cold. This was real. Her life was on the line, and Eric was behind it all. But there was more to the story, more that she didn't know. Before she could respond, a police officer burst into the room, holding a phone in his hand. "Detective," he said urgently, "we've got news. We've located Eric." Florence's heart stopped. "Where is he?" she demanded, barely able to speak. The officer's voice was grim. "He's at the airport, trying to leave the country." Florence's breath caught in her throat. Eric was trying to flee. But it wasn't over yet. The words echoed in Florence's mind like a thunderclap. Eric was trying to flee. Her pulse raced, the blood in her veins suddenly ice-cold. She had been so close to stopping him. So close to making him face the consequences of his actions. But now, with every second that passed, he was slipping further away. The detective looked at her, his expression unreadable. "We need to move quickly, Miss Flourence," he said. "If Eric's trying to leave the country, we'll need to act fast. You may want to stay here, but we're coming with you." Flourence could hardly believe what was happening. She had trusted Eric, loved him, built a life with him. And now, in one swift moment, he was a fugitive. A man who had been plotting her death for nothing more than greed. "We can't let him get away," Flourence said through clenched teeth. She wasn't going to sit idly by while Eric walked free. She wouldn't let him win. The detective nodded, motioning for the officers to move out. "We're heading to the airport now. We'll have him cornered before he can get too far." Flourence didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed her purse, her eyes locked on the door as she followed the detective out of the office and into the waiting police car. As they drove through the dark streets of Lagos, her mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. How had he planned this? What had gone wrong? She had to know. She had to understand how he thought he could get away with it. And more importantly, how could she make sure he never got another chance to hurt her or anyone else again? The city flashed by in a blur of headlights and neon lights. Flourence barely noticed the passing scenery, her mind consumed by the need to stop Eric. She could only pray they were fast enough. The airport was just ahead when the detective's phone buzzed. He glanced down at the screen before looking at Flourence. His face was hard. "We've got a problem," he said. "Eric's plane is about to take off. He's made it past security." Florence's breath caught. No. She couldn't lose him now. Not after everything. The tension in the air was suffocating. The weight of everything that had happened hung over her like a storm cloud. "We're not giving up," she said, her voice fierce. "We're getting him." The detective didn't argue. He pressed his foot to the gas pedal, the car lurching forward with a burst of speed. They arrived at the airport in a matter of minutes, but it felt like an eternity. Florence's heart pounded in her chest as they rushed into the terminal. The lights overhead buzzed, and the sound of bustling travelers filled the air. But Florence's mind was elsewhere. She was focused on one thing, and one thing only: finding Eric. The detective led her toward the back of the airport, where they could access the runway and the private jets parked nearby. Florence's footsteps echoed on the tile floor, the urgency of the moment pushing her forward. They turned a corner, and Florence's breath caught in her throat. Ahead, she saw Eric, his back to them, walking briskly toward the jet that was meant to carry him away from everything. His luggage was already loaded onto the plane, and his step was quick, almost desperate. He was almost there. Florence's heart stopped for a moment, and then she heard the detective's voice behind her. "Stop him." Without thinking, Flourence ran. She didn't care that she was making a scene. She didn't care that everyone was staring at her as she sprinted down the hallway. All that mattered was stopping Eric. "Eric!" she screamed, her voice cutting through the noise of the airport. He turned around, his face twisting in surprise, but it quickly morphed into something darker. Panic? Fear? A mixture of both? He didn't have time to react before Flourence was right there, standing between him and his escape. "Flourence, what the hell are you doing?" Eric spat, his eyes wide with fury. "I'm stopping you, Eric," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "You're not going anywhere. You won't get away with it." Eric's jaw tightened. For a moment, it looked like he might lash out, but instead, he took a step back. His eyes darted to the plane behind him, then to the approaching officers. His escape plan was crumbling in front of his eyes. "You think this is over?" he sneered. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Flourence. I will find a way out of this. I always do. But before he could say anything more, the detective's voice rang out. Eric Nwosu, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and attempting to flee the country. You have the right to remain silent. Eric's eyes widened as the officers closed in on him. For the first time, Flourence saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. He realized he had nowhere left to run. His whole world was collapsing, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Flourence, he said, his voice low, almost pleading. You don't understand. This isn't what it looks like. But Flourence wasn't listening anymore. She had heard enough. She had seen enough. The officers cuffed Eric, and as they led him away, Flourence stood there, her body trembling. The weight of everything, of the betrayal, of the lies, of the plot to take her life, finally began to sink in. Eric was going to face the law. And no matter what he said now, there was no escaping the consequences. Flourence turned to the detective, her eyes filled with both exhaustion and relief. It's over, she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. It's finally over. But even as she said those words, she couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was still at play. What had driven Eric to such lengths? What had pushed him to the edge of madness? As she walked out of the airport, the flashing lights of the police cars behind her, Flourence knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. The truth would come out. And the man she had once trusted would pay for his actions, no matter the cost. The air was thick with tension as Flourence stepped out of the airport, the flashing lights of the police cars casting an eerie glow on the pavement. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, and despite the relief of seeing Eric finally arrested, something deep inside her felt unsettled. The detective, Olamide, walked beside her, his expression grim but focused. We've got him in custody, but this is just the beginning, Flourence, he said, his voice low but firm. We need to understand the full extent of his involvement in all of this. The helicopter crash, the financial records, the attempts on your life, it's all connected. Flourence nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of everything she had uncovered. Her husband, the man she had loved and trusted, had tried to take everything from her. But the more she thought about it, the more questions bubbled up in her mind. Why had Eric gone to such extreme lengths? The detective's words echoed in her mind. We need to understand the full extent of his involvement. Flourence didn't know where to begin. She had already lost so much. Her father, her sense of security, her faith in the man she had married. And now, even with Eric in police custody, she felt like a part of her was still lost in the chaos. The truth was out, but what if there were deeper layers still hidden beneath the surface? Detective Olamide, she asked, her voice trembling. What happens now? What if Eric has more people involved in this? What if he's just the tip of the iceberg? The detective gave her a long, hard look. That's what we're trying to figure out. It's too early to say for certain, but we believe there's more to this than just a botched murder attempt. Eric didn't act alone. Someone else must have been pulling the strings. Flourence swallowed hard. She had suspected for a while that there was more to the story than Eric's greed, but hearing it confirmed by the detective sent a chill down her spine. Who else could be involved? And why? As they climbed into the car, the detective pulled out his phone and began reviewing the case files. Flourence stared out the window, her thoughts consumed by the web of lies and deception that had entangled her life. She thought about her father's fortune, how she had always taken it for granted, and how it had now become the prize in a dangerous game. Was it just about the money? Or was there something more sinister at play? The car ride was quiet, each passing minute stretching into what felt like an eternity. When they finally arrived at the police station, Flourence barely registered the hustle and bustle around her. Her mind was fixed on one question. Who else was behind this? She followed Detective Olamide down the hall and into an interrogation room. Eric was seated at the table, his hands cuffed in front of him, his face drawn and pale. He looked nothing like the confident, charming man she had once known. He was broken now, his mask of arrogance stripped away, and for the first time, Flourence saw him for what he truly was, a coward who had been playing a dangerous game, and now he was paying the price. The detective motioned for Flourence to sit down, and she did so, her gaze fixed on her husband. "Eric," the detective began, his tone calm but stern, "we have enough evidence to charge you with multiple crimes, including attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy. But what we need from you now is the truth. Who else was involved in your scheme?" Eric didn't immediately respond. He stared at the table, his mind clearly racing. Flourence watched him carefully, praying that he would finally confess. After what felt like an eternity, Eric finally spoke, his voice shaky and defeated. I didn't want it to go this far. It was supposed to be simple. Get rid of Flourence, get the inheritance, and start fresh. But the more I got into it, the harder it became to back out." Flourence's stomach twisted as she listened to his words. He had never once shown remorse for his actions. It was all about the money, about the power he thought he could gain. But now, his empire was crumbling, and he was left with nothing. "Who else, Eric?" the detective pressed. "You didn't do this alone. Who else was in on this?" Eric hesitated, his eyes darting nervously to the door. It was clear he was calculating his next move, trying to figure out whether it was worth betraying his accomplices. Finally he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's someone I was working with," Eric said, his voice trembling. "A businessman. A wealthy man. I didn't want to get involved, but he had leverage over me. He knew everything about my debts, my secrets. He said he'd help me, if I helped him with this." Flourence's heart raced. "Who was this man? Who is he?" she demanded, her voice rising with frustration. "Tell me, Eric. Who else is involved?" Eric looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and regret. "His name is Chijioko Koro," he said softly. "He's an influential businessman. He's been behind a lot of shady deals, and he wanted to use my marriage to you as a way to get to your father's wealth. He's the one who pushed me to go through with it." Flourence's blood ran cold. Chijioko Koro? She had heard the name before. He was a well-known figure in the business world, but she never imagined he would be involved in something like this. The pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fall into place, but there was still one question left unanswered. "Where is he now?" Flourence asked, her voice low and dangerous. Eric's eyes flickered with panic, and for a moment, it seemed like he might reveal more. But then he clamped his lips shut, a look of defiance in his eyes. "You'll never find him," Eric spat. "He's always one step ahead. He's gone, Flourence. And you'll never catch him." The words hit her like a slap to the face. "Gone? But where? How?" The detective's voice broke the silence. "We'll see about that, Eric. You're not off the hook yet. We'll get to Chijioke. And when we do, we'll have all the answers." Flourence stood up abruptly, her mind swirling with anger and confusion. "I need to find him," she muttered to herself. "I need to find Chijioke." The detective grabbed her arm, his grip firm but gentle. "We'll find him, Flourence. We're not done yet. But you need to stay calm. We're getting closer." But Flourence couldn't calm down. The man who had nearly destroyed her life was still out there, pulling the strings from the shadows. And she wasn't going to rest until she had the answers. Her journey was far from over. But before I tell you what happened next, if you're still watching this far, it means your heart's following her story too. Go ahead and hit the like button, so more people can see how far greed can go. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because what's coming next will leave you speechless. Flourence's mind was a storm of confusion, anger, and determination as she left the interrogation room. Chijioko Koro. The name echoed in her mind, a constant reminder that the man who had been behind Eric's plot was still out there, a shadow she couldn't quite grasp. The police were closing in on Eric, but the true mastermind, the man who had manipulated Eric into trying to murder her, was still free, hiding in the shadows. Flourence couldn't let that happen. She wouldn't stop until she found him. But even as she walked through the bustling halls of the police station, her thoughts were clouded with doubt. Chijioko Koro was no ordinary man. He was wealthy, powerful, and ruthless. He had the kind of influence that could make him vanish without a trace, leaving no one the wiser. And now, Flourence realized, she was in the fight of her life. Flourence, Detective Olamide's voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to face him, her expression determined. We're pulling every string we can, but this is going to take time. Okoro has too many connections. It's not going to be easy to find him. I don't care how long it takes, Flourence said, her voice unwavering. I want him found. I need to know everything. Olamide studied her for a moment, his gaze softening. I understand. We'll do everything we can, but you need to be careful. Okoro is dangerous. We don't know what lengths he'll go to in order to protect himself. Flourence nodded, her jaw clenched in frustration. She wasn't about to back down now. Eric had already made his choices, betrayed her, tried to kill her. Now it was time for her to make hers. She wouldn't let him or Chijioke win. Not like this. As the detective turned to leave, Florence's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, expecting to see another update from the lawyer or the police. But when she saw the number, her breath hitched. It was an unknown number. She answered, her heart racing. Flourence. The voice on the other end was low, smooth, and almost too calm. I know what you're looking for. Her pulse quickened. Who is this? The voice chuckled softly. You don't need to know my name, darling. You just need to know that I can help you find Chijioke Okoro. Florence's stomach twisted. Why would you want to help me? Let's just say I have an interest in seeing him fall, the voice replied, dripping with venom. But be careful, Flourence. There are more people involved than you think. Okoro's web is far-reaching. If you're not careful, you'll end up just like Eric, caught in a trap you can't escape from. Florence's mind raced. Who was this person? And why were they helping her? Was this a trap? I don't trust you, she said, her voice hard. If you want to help, show me proof. I won't make a move until I know you're telling the truth. A pause. Then the voice spoke again, more serious now. Fine. Meet me tomorrow at the old warehouse on Allen Avenue. Midnight. I'll have what you need. Flourence hesitated. And how do I know you won't just disappear? The voice let out a low laugh. Because I'm the only one who knows how to bring Chijioke down. But it's up to you whether you want to take that risk. Before she could respond, the line went dead. Flourence stood there, her thoughts spinning. Who had just called her? And what did they know about Okoro that could help her? She had no choice. If she wanted answers, if she wanted to stop Okoro, she would have to take the risk. But something about the call didn't sit right with her. Was this person genuinely trying to help, or was it another part of the web that had already ensnared her? She couldn't be sure. But she would find out soon enough. Later that night, the tension in the air felt suffocating as Flourence stood in front of the old warehouse on Allen Avenue. The moon hung high in the sky, casting long shadows across the street. The entire area was eerily quiet, and the smell of damp concrete filled the air. Florence's heart pounded as she approached the entrance, every step heavier than the last. Why had she agreed to this? The voice on the phone had seemed confident, but there was something unsettling about the way they spoke. Could she really trust them? Could she afford not to? If Chijioke was the one pulling the strings, she had to take any chance she could get to bring him down. Flourence pushed open the rusty door of the warehouse, the creak of the hinges echoing in the silence. Inside, the space was vast and empty, filled only with old boxes and the scent of decay. She stepped inside cautiously, her eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. A figure emerged from the darkness. A man. His face hidden by the hood of his jacket. He stepped into the faint light, revealing a lean, muscular build and a face that seemed both familiar and foreign at the same time. Florence's heart skipped a beat as she realized who he was. It was Chijioke Okoro. He smiled, a cold, calculating smile that made her blood run cold. I was wondering when you'd show up, he said, his voice smooth and almost too calm. Florence's body stiffened as she took a step back. What is this? What do you want from me? Chijioke laughed softly, taking a step toward her. You've been chasing shadows. Flourence. But now you've found me. And you'll find out soon enough that this game is far from over. Flaurence's breath caught in her throat as his words sank in. She had walked right into his trap. The man she had been hunting, the one who had been controlling everything from behind the scenes, was standing in front of her now. And there was nowhere to run. The cold air in the warehouse seemed to press in on Flourence, suffocating her with its oppressive silence. Chijioke Okoro, the man she had been hunting for so long, now stood in front of her, his presence overwhelming and filled with a chilling confidence. He had the upper hand, and he knew it. Flaurence's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to steady her breath. She had come here looking for answers, but now she realized just how dangerously close she had come to falling deeper into Okoro's trap. "You're a bold one, Flourence," Chijioke said, his voice smooth and dark, like honey with poison. "I have to admit, I'm impressed. Most people would have backed down by now. But not you." She clenched her fists at her sides, her gaze never leaving his. "What do you want from me, Chijioke? Why all of this? The crash, Eric, everything. What's your endgame?" He chuckled softly, a sound that sent shivers down her spine. "You're a smart woman. You should know by now. This was never just about your inheritance. No, that's just a small part of it." Flaurence's stomach twisted. "Then what is it about?" Chijioke's eyes glinted with malice as he took a slow step forward. "It's about power, Flourence. Control. The kind of control that comes with owning everything and everyone around you. Your father's wealth was just the beginning. But your father, he was far more than just a businessman. He had connections, resources, influence. And that's what I wanted. The real prize wasn't his fortune, it was his influence." Flaurence's mind raced as his words sank in. Her father's influence? What was he talking about? Her father had always been a respected businessman, but she never knew that he was involved in anything more dangerous, more sinister. "You're lying," she said, her voice trembling with disbelief. "My father had nothing to do with your schemes." Chijioke smiled, an eerie, cold smile that sent a shudder down her spine. "Oh, Flourence, you have no idea what your father was involved in. He was the key to so much more. And now that he's gone, I need to take his place." Flourence felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Her father had been a man of integrity, or so she thought. He had always been open about his business dealings. But now, Chijioke's words made her question everything. "Why me?" she whispered, barely able to speak. "Why involve me? I'm just a woman. I'm nothing to you." Chijioke stepped closer, his presence looming over her. "Because, Flourence, you were always the perfect pawn. A beautiful, naive woman with a fortune waiting for her. You trusted Eric, and he was the perfect tool to get you out of the way. He just wasn't as competent as I'd hoped." Flaurence's heart sank. Eric, her own husband, had been a mere pawn in this man's game. She had always suspected that there was more to his betrayal than greed. But this? This was something else entirely. "And what happens now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Chijioke's smile widened, his eyes gleaming with wicked satisfaction. "Now? Now we finish what we started. Eric may have failed, but he got me this far. And you, Flourence, you're going to help me take the next step." Flourence recoiled, her mind racing. Take the next step? What did that even mean? "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice shaking with both fear and defiance. "You'll never get away with it. The police are already on their way. You're finished." Chijioke's expression darkened, and he stepped even closer, his face mere inches from hers. "You think the police can stop me?" His voice dropped to a whisper, filled with dark amusement. "You think they can take me down? I own half of this city, Flourence. I control the people who matter. The police won't do a thing. They're just a distraction." Flaurence's blood ran cold as his words sank in. She had underestimated how deep this man's reach went. He wasn't just a businessman. He was a power player, manipulating people and events from behind the scenes. And now, he was playing the final card in his twisted game. But Flourence wasn't ready to give up. "Not yet." "You're wrong," she said, her voice gaining strength. "You might think you have control, but you don't. You've made a huge mistake. I'm not going to be your pawn anymore. I'll expose you, Chijioke. I'll make sure everyone knows what you've done." Chijioke's laugh was cold and mocking. "You really think you can take me down? After everything I've built? You'll be silenced long before you even get a chance to make a move." Flaurence's mind raced. She had to think fast. She had to find a way out of this. She couldn't let him win. But as she looked around the dark, empty warehouse, she realized that Chijioke had all the cards. He controlled the situation, controlled the people in power, and she was alone. She couldn't outsmart him. She couldn't outfight him. But she wasn't going down without a fight. Flaurence's heart raced as she took a deep breath, her resolve solidifying. She knew what she had to do. "I might not have your money or your influence or your power," she said, her voice steady and fierce. "But I have something you don't, an unwavering will to fight. And that's something you'll never be able to control." Chijioke's eyes narrowed, his smile faltering for the first time. "You're making a mistake, Flourence. I'll give you one last chance to walk away from this. Otherwise, you'll regret it." Flourence didn't flinch. "No. You'll regret underestimating me." With that, she turned and ran, her footsteps echoing through the empty warehouse. The sound of her heart pounding in her ears drowned out everything else. She couldn't let him catch her. She couldn't let him win. As she ran, the world around her blurred into the background, and all that mattered was one thing: survival. She had to get to the police. She had to get help. She couldn't do this alone. But as she rounded the corner of the warehouse, she was hit by the full weight of the situation. Chijioke wasn't just a man to be arrested. He was a force, a dangerous, powerful force. And getting out of his trap was going to be far harder than she had imagined. Flaurence's heart raced as she sprinted through the dimly lit corridor of the warehouse, the sound of her own footsteps pounding in her ears. Every part of her screamed to stop, to turn back, but the growing sense of urgency pushed her forward. Chijioke was a man who didn't let his plans fail, and she had just made a dangerous enemy. She could hear his voice behind her, a distant echo, but the closer she got to the exit, the more her fears seemed to catch up with her. The sound of footsteps behind her quickened. He was coming for her, and he wasn't alone. She dashed through the door of the warehouse and into the alleyway outside, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The night air bit at her skin, but she didn't stop to feel it. Her mind was consumed by one thought: get to safety. Flaurence's phone buzzed in her pocket, and she fumbled to pull it out, praying it wasn't too late. She swiped the screen and saw a new message from Detective Olamide. "We've got a lead. Heading to your location now. Don't make any moves." Flaurence's chest tightened with a mix of relief and terror. The police were on their way. But would they get there in time? Chijioke's reach was vast, and Flourence knew that if he was involved in something this dangerous, no one was beyond his influence. The alleyway stretched before her, dark and silent, the only sound being the rapid beating of her heart. She glanced behind her but saw nothing, no sign of Chijioke's men yet. Her hands trembled as she dialed the detective's number, holding the phone to her ear with a sense of desperation. "Detective Olamide?" she whispered urgently. "I'm out of the warehouse, but I think they're coming for me. I don't know how much time I have. Please, you have to hurry. Stay calm. Flourence." "We're on our way," came the detective's reassuring voice. "Don't engage with anyone. Do you have a safe place to go? Any family or friends nearby?" Flourence glanced around the alley. There was no time for a safe place. No time to reach out to anyone. The only thing that mattered was getting to the police before Chijioke and his men reached her. "I'll stay put," she said, her voice shaky. "Just get here fast. Please." Before the detective could respond, she heard the unmistakable sound of tires screeching from a distance. Her stomach churned. She knew they were here. Chijioke's men. They were closing in. She turned and started to run again, faster this time, but the fear started to take root deep in her bones. She didn't know how far she could run. She didn't know what would happen next. Florence's mind raced as she ran through the maze of back streets, desperate to stay ahead. How could she outrun them? How could she stop this nightmare? Suddenly, the screeching tires grew louder, and a black SUV rounded the corner, speeding toward her. Florence's heart skipped a beat as she turned to find another way out. But there was nowhere to hide. Nowhere to escape. The SUV skidded to a stop in front of her, and the door swung open. Two large men in dark suits stepped out, their eyes locking onto her with cold, calculating intent. Florence froze for a moment, panic gripping her, but then she heard it, voices in the distance. The police were finally here. Without thinking, she turned and bolted in the opposite direction, her legs pumping harder, faster. She could hear the men yelling behind her, but she didn't dare look back. She had one chance to escape, and she wasn't going to waste it. As she rounded a corner, her phone buzzed again. She glanced down, her breath catching when she saw the message from Detective Olamide. "Stay where you are. We're 3 minutes away. Don't engage." She didn't have the luxury of time. Florence's eyes darted around the alley, desperately searching for an escape route. The buildings on either side of her were too high to climb, and the streets were too busy with traffic. She had to keep moving. She had to stay ahead. But before she could make her next move, the men caught up to her. One of them grabbed her arm, yanking her to a stop. She gasped, struggling against his grip. "Where do you think you're going, Flourence?" The man sneered, his grip tightening. Florence's pulse raced. She kicked and squirmed, her mind a blur of fear and desperation. She couldn't let them take her. She couldn't let Chijioke win. With a burst of strength, she yanked her arm free and slammed her elbow into the man's stomach. He grunted in surprise, stumbling back. But it wasn't enough. The other man lunged forward, grabbing her by the waist. But before he could pull her back, a sudden shout echoed down the alley. "Stop right there!" Florence's heart skipped a beat. She recognized the voice. It was Detective Olamide. She turned to see him, along with several officers, rushing toward her with guns drawn. The men who had grabbed her froze, their expressions shifting to one of shock. "Drop your weapons," Olamide commanded, his voice firm and authoritative. "Now!" The two men hesitated, then dropped their arms, stepping back slowly. Flourence, still gasping for breath, looked over at the detective, a sense of relief washing over her. I thought I was done for," she whispered, her voice shaky. Olamide gave her a small, reassuring smile. "Not today. You're safe now." Florence's legs felt like jelly as she stumbled toward him. The officers moved quickly to apprehend the men, but Florence's focus was on the detective. "Chijioke is still out there," she said urgently. "He's the one pulling the strings. He's the one who's behind all of this." Olamide nodded, his face grim. "We know. And we're going to bring him down. This isn't over yet." Florence's mind was still reeling. She couldn't believe that it had come to this, that she had been just a pawn in Chijioke's twisted game. But now, with the police at her side, she felt a sense of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. She wasn't alone anymore. But as she looked over her shoulder, her mind raced with one thought. Where was Chijioke? The air was thick with anticipation, and Florence's mind was spinning with the knowledge that Chijioke Okoro was still out there. Even with the police at her side, she couldn't shake the feeling that something more sinister was brewing. The people she had trusted, the ones who had been involved in her father's empire, had played her for a fool, and now, she was stuck in the middle of a war she never wanted to fight. As Detective Olamide and his team apprehended the men who had tried to grab her, Flourence stood still, her heart pounding. She felt the cold chill of reality settling in. Her father's death, Eric's betrayal, Chijioke's manipulations. It was all connected in ways she hadn't fully understood until now. "Detective, what happens now?" Flourence asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. "What about Chijioke? Where is he?" Olamide turned to her, his expression resolute. "We're doing everything we can to locate him, Flourence. But we need your help. We need to know everything. Who else is involved? Anyone who might be helping him escape." Flourence shook her head, her mind struggling to piece together the fragments of what she had learned over the past few days. Who else could be involved? Eric. Eric was just a pawn in all of this, she whispered, more to herself than to the detective. He didn't know the full extent of what Chijioke was doing. But Chijioke's not just after my father's wealth. He wants power, control, influence. He's been building something far bigger than I could ever imagine. Olamide's eyes narrowed as he processed her words. That's what we're worried about. Chijioke is a master manipulator. He's not just a businessman. He's dangerous. And he's got enough power to make people disappear. Florence's stomach turned. She knew the detective was right. But what she couldn't shake was the idea that even with Chijioke's arrest looming, he was always one step ahead. How had he managed to escape again and again? Is there anyone who could know where he is? Olamide asked, his voice firm. Florence's mind flickered to the one person who might have known something. Her father's old business partners. But most of them were either dead, gone, or too scared to speak. She couldn't trust anyone, especially not now. But then it hit her. There was one person, an old family friend, who had always kept in touch with her father. Someone who had been there for every major business decision. If anyone knew the depths of Chijioke's reach, it was him. His name is Samuel Nwosu, Flourence said, her voice low. He was close to my father. He may know more about Chijioke's dealings than anyone. Where can we find him? Olamide asked, his attention sharp. I don't know, Flourence admitted, a knot tightening in her chest. But he's been living in a small town outside of Lagos. I can get you his address. He's the last person who might have information on Chijioke. Then we don't waste any more time, Olamide said, motioning for one of his officers to take action. We'll head there now. As the officers prepared to leave, Florence's thoughts raced. She knew that time was running out. Every second Chijioke had was a second closer to him slipping away forever. But there was something else gnawing at her, the unsettling feeling that Samuel Nwosu might not be as innocent as he seemed. After all, in this game of power, no one was truly clean. The drive to the small town was tense, and every minute that passed felt like a lifetime. Flourence stared out the window, her mind consumed with what she might uncover. Would Samuel have the answers she needed? Or would he be yet another piece in Chijioke's vast network of lies and manipulation? As the police convoy rolled into the town, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the narrow streets. They arrived at a modest house tucked away at the edge of the village, a stark contrast to the wealth Flourence had once known. Detective Olamide stepped out of the car first, signaling for the officers to remain cautious. Flourence hesitated before following him, her nerves on edge. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the chance to finally take Chijioke down. They knocked on the door, and a moment later, an elderly man opened it. His face was lined with age, and his once sharp eyes had softened over time. But when he saw Flourence standing there, his expression changed instantly. It was a look of recognition, followed by something more complicated, a mix of fear and resignation. Flourence, Samuel Nwosu said softly, his voice gravelly. I didn't expect to see you here. Flourence stepped forward, her heart heavy. Samuel, I need your help. My father's death. It's all connected to Chijioke Okoro. I need to know everything. You were the one who was closest to him. You must know something. Samuel's face darkened as he stepped aside, allowing them to enter. You're right, Flourence. I knew more than I ever should have. But I didn't have a choice. Chijioke has his claws in so many places. If I'd spoken out, I would have been next. Your father was a good man, but he got involved with people who didn't care about his morals. They just wanted power. Flourence sat down, her mind racing. Power. What do you mean? Samuel took a deep breath, his eyes glinting with old pain. Chijioke wasn't just after your father's wealth. He wanted control over everything. His connections, his businesses. But your father wouldn't play along. And that's why he... Samuel stopped suddenly, his eyes flickering toward the window. Flourence followed his gaze, her pulse quickening. Something wasn't right. Before she could say anything, the sound of a car engine revving outside interrupted them. The unmistakable roar of an SUV echoed through the quiet town. "Get down!" Olamide shouted, pushing Flourence to the floor just as the windows shattered from the impact of a bullet. Florence's heart dropped into her stomach as the glass fell around her. Chijioke had found them. The world seemed to slow as the sound of shattering glass filled the air. Florence's heart raced as shards rained down around her, the glass fragments cutting through the air with an unnerving sound. Detective Olamide quickly pulled her to the ground, covering her body with his own as more gunfire rang out, hitting the walls and windows of Samuel's house. Florence's breath caught in her throat. Chijioke had found them. Every muscle in her body screamed with fear, but her mind was focused on one thing: survival. She couldn't let Chijioke's men get to her. She couldn't let them win. "Stay down!" Olamide shouted, his voice low but firm as he shielded her from the ongoing barrage. The officers outside were already returning fire, trying to hold back the attackers. Samuel's face had gone pale, his eyes wide with fear. "He's coming." Chijioke's men. They're relentless. If they're here, it means he's close. He won't stop until he gets what he wants. Florence's mind raced. Chijioke was closing in on her. No one was safe anymore. She glanced at the detective, her pulse thundering in her ears. "We need to stop them. We can't just hide. Chijioke will kill everyone if we don't act." The detective nodded grimly. "You're right. But we need to move fast. He's already made his move, and if we don't get out of here soon, we'll all be targets." Flourence couldn't waste any more time. She knew the next step was to get to Chijioke before he got to them. This was the moment where everything would either fall apart or come together. She stood up quickly, pulling Olamide to his feet with urgency. "I can't wait anymore. We need to make a move now." The detective hesitated for a moment, his eyes scanning the room, weighing the risks. "Flourence, you're making a dangerous decision. Chijioke isn't just going to let you waltz in and take him down. He's not like Eric. He's far worse." "I don't care," she snapped, her voice filled with defiance. "I didn't come this far to stop now. We have the chance to end this." Florence's mind was set. She couldn't let fear dictate her actions anymore. Chijioke had already taken too much from her. Her family, her trust, her future, and she wasn't about to let him take her life as well. Without another word, she bolted for the door, her footsteps fast and determined. The sound of gunfire still rang out behind her, but she didn't flinch. She could hear Olamide and the other officers following her closely, their steps quick and heavy. The street outside was chaotic. The sun was beginning to dip beneath the horizon, casting a crimson glow over the neighborhood, but Flourence barely noticed. She was too focused on one thing: finding Chijioke, stopping him, and putting an end to this nightmare. Ahead, a sleek black SUV screeched to a halt. The doors opened, and two of Chijioke's men, both armed and dangerous, jumped out. They immediately spotted Flourence, their expressions grim as they moved toward her with threatening intent. But Flourence didn't hesitate. She ran toward them, ignoring the voice inside her head that told her to turn back. She was done hiding. Done being scared. One of the men aimed his weapon, but Flourence was quicker. She dropped to the ground, rolling out of the way just in time as the bullet whizzed past her. She grabbed a nearby rock and hurled it at the man's head with precision. He staggered back, stunned, and she didn't waste a second. She charged at him, tackling him to the ground. The other man lunged at her, but Olamide was there, gun drawn, and with a quick shot, the threat was neutralized. Flourence felt a surge of adrenaline as she stood up, breathing hard. "Let's move," Olamide said, his voice tight. "Chijioke's inside the house. We need to finish this." They sprinted toward the house where Samuel had been hiding, but as they neared the door, a sudden explosion rocked the ground. The building trembled, and Flourence stumbled, falling against the wall. Her heart lurched as she looked around. Chijioke had anticipated this move. He wasn't going to let her take him down so easily. The door to Samuel's house was gone, reduced to rubble, and the sound of shuffling feet echoed from inside. Florence's mind raced as she pushed herself to her feet. There was no turning back now. Inside, Chijioke stood near the rubble, his silhouette outlined by the smoke and fire that consumed the house. He was calm, composed, as if nothing had happened. His cold eyes met Flourence as she entered the room, her hand shaking with a mix of anger and fear. "You're persistent, I'll give you that," Chijioke said, his voice low and mocking. "But you're too late, Flourence. It's over." Florence's blood boiled. She could see the smirk on his face, the arrogance in his eyes. This was the moment. The moment she either took him down or let him destroy everything. "I'm not done yet," she said through gritted teeth, her voice unwavering. Chijioke's smirk faded, replaced with an icy stare. "You don't understand, do you? You've been a pawn in this game from the very beginning. You think you can just walk in here and stop me?" Flourence stepped forward, her hands clenched into fists. "I'm done being a pawn. You've taken everything from me, Chijioke. My father, my trust, my family. And now, I'm going to make sure you pay for it." In the split second before Chijioke could react, Flourence charged at him, knocking him off balance. The two struggled, rolling across the floor as the room trembled with each movement. Florence's mind was clear, focused on the one thing that mattered, bringing him down. Chijioke tried to fight back, his hands reaching for his pocket, but Flourence was quicker. She grabbed a piece of broken wood from the debris and slammed it into his arm, forcing him to drop the knife he had been reaching for. Olamide entered the room just in time, his gun aimed at Chijioke. "It's over, Okoro. You're done." Chijioke sneered, but his arrogance had dissolved into fear. He knew the game was up. He was finished. Flourence stood over him, her body trembling with the aftermath of the fight, but her eyes filled with the triumph of victory. This was it. The end of everything he had started. But even as she looked down at him, she couldn't help but wonder. What else was out there? What other secrets had Chijioke hidden? Before she could ask, the sound of sirens grew louder. The police had arrived, and Chijioke was going to face the law for his crimes. Flourence took a deep breath, knowing that this chapter of her life had finally come to an end. And the beginning of her freedom had just begun. If you believe in justice from above, hit the like button. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories where karma speaks louder than words.